The day began with an unusual calm over the Baltic Sea, the waters reflecting a stillness that seemed ordinary, yet sources within naval monitoring circles immediately noted deviations in standard maritime traffic. A Russian submarine, moving with deliberate caution, was reported near Swedish territorial waters. Official statements initially framed the detection as routine exercises, citing routine maritime movements. Yet, in expert circles, the tone was markedly different. Analysts emphasized that the observed patterns did not align with standard navigational behavior, hinting at strategic reconnaissance rather than training. By mid-morning, Swedish military observers had increased radar sweeps, tracking the submarine's progress with a precision that suggested pre-existing protocols were activated without hesitation. According to insiders, orders for immediate aerial and surface reconnaissance were executed in real time, bypassing standard bureaucratic delays. The rapidity of the response in itself became a point of intrigue. Military sources noted that all anti-submarine units were placed on heightened alert, their deployment coordinated seamlessly across multiple command centers. Meanwhile, diplomatic channels remained cautiously silent. Official messages emphasized calm, yet private communications within government circles revealed concern over potential escalations. Analysts noted the dual narrative: externally, a composed posture; internally, contingency strategies were under discreet review. The strategic calculus behind such moves suggested a preemptive mindset, anticipating scenarios that public statements did not acknowledge. At this juncture, observers of Baltic security trends recognized a familiar but rarely witnessed pattern: an immediate, well-coordinated response that hinted at pre-existing threat assessments. Surveillance logs indicated that Sweden's naval readiness had anticipated an incursion scenario, though the precise timing and nature of the vessel's approach had not been publicly disclosed. On the surface, it was a routine day of maritime patrols. Beneath, the subtle signs indicated an unfolding security operation of significant complexity. Communications from sources close to the Naval Command suggested that every maneuver, from radar sweeps to aircraft patrols, was executed in a manner consistent with exercises planned for heightened tensions. Yet, the reasoning behind the submarine's presence remained opaque, raising questions that official statements avoided. Possibly it is worth observing how the situation develops in the hours ahead. Sources indicate this may only be the initial phase of a broader strategic test, but further developments revealed that even this immediate alert was only the visible layer of a much deeper operational picture. By midday, a clearer picture of the unfolding situation began to emerge, although the details remained largely confined to classified briefings and insider reports. Surveillance data, cross-reference from multiple radar and sonar sources, confirmed the submarine's course and depth were consistent with reconnaissance patterns rather than standard transit. Analysts in security circles noted subtle anomalies in communication emissions, suggesting operational protocols intended to minimize detection while collecting sensitive maritime data. Official statements continued to emphasize routine naval exercises, but these reassurances were increasingly at odds with operational realities. In the control rooms of Sweden's Baltic naval commands, decisions were executed with measured urgency. Anti-submarine vessels were repositioned along likely interception routes, while airborne units conducted coordinated sweeps across the corridor of possible movement. According to informed sources, these maneuvers were executed without the usual administrative lag, reflecting a state of readiness that, in practice, blurred the line between training and active response. The strategic implication, insiders suggested, was an immediate demonstration of deterrence, showing operational readiness without overtly escalating the situation. Meanwhile, intelligence units reported a series of encrypted transmissions intercepted from the submarine, raising further analytical questions. These signals, while officially described as routine communication, were interpreted by analysts as deliberate testing of Swedish tracking protocols. Observers in defense circles began to note a complex interplay. The submarine's movement was subtle, yet meticulously planned to elicit responses that would reveal Sweden's alert thresholds. In parallel, the government's communication channels remained carefully managed. Public assurances were framed to convey control, while internal briefings emphasized uncertainty in the submarine's mission objectives. Experts following these developments highlighted the contrast between outward calm and inward scrutiny. noting that even small deviations in timing or route were sufficient to trigger multi-layered defensive measures. At this stage, the day had transformed into a controlled assessment of both operational capabilities and strategic signaling. Analysts described a choreography. The submarine's approach and Sweden's response were intertwined in a carefully calibrated display of readiness, probing limits without crossing overt thresholds. The subtle tensions of the Baltic waters reflected not only military calculations but also broader geopolitical considerations, with observers noting the potential for rapid escalation should misinterpretations arise. By this point, the narrative had shifted from simple detection to a nuanced evaluation of intent and capability. Yet, even as official accounts remained muted, insiders emphasized that the full implications of these movements would only become visible as patterns unfolded. In these hours, the latent message was unmistakable. Sweden was prepared to respond decisively if required, though the reasoning behind the submarine's incursion remained largely hidden from public view. However, even this carefully choreographed situation concealed deeper layers of strategic maneuvering, which would only begin to reveal themselves in the subsequent hours. As the day progressed toward its midpoint, the initial framework of the encounter began to unravel, revealing layers of activity and decision-making that had remained obscured beneath the surface. According to insiders, the submarine's trajectory was not random. Its maneuvers suggested a deliberate pattern aimed at probing Sweden's anti-submarine capabilities, testing both technical responses and procedural thresholds. Radar cross-sections and sonar tracks indicated that the vessel repeatedly altered depth and course in subtle increments, a strategy that in expert circles was described as a method of operational reconnaissance designed to observe without provoking overt engagement. Meanwhile, within Swedish Naval Command, the response evolved from standard alert procedures into a more intricate orchestration of assets. Sources report that decision-making was distributed across multiple command centers, each feeding real-time intelligence into a central operational picture. Analysts in the defense community noted that the rapid coordination, airborne patrols, surface vessel positioning, and electronic surveillance reflected years of contingency planning, but also an unusual willingness to act without formal public acknowledgement. The juxtaposition was striking. Official statements continued to frame the events as precautionary measures, yet internally the level of alert and the speed of execution suggested the situation was treated as a live operational test. Signals intelligence added another dimension. Intercepted communications, while officially unconfirmed, were analyzed by experts as a method of testing Sweden's electronic warfare readiness. The encrypted messages, apparently transmitted at irregular intervals, seemed designed to elicit specific monitoring responses, revealing not just the location of naval assets, but also reaction times, protocols followed, and communication hierarchies within the Swedish command structure. Sources within defense circles indicated that analysts were already beginning to map potential vulnerabilities, a process conducted quietly, with minimal external disclosure, highlighting a pattern of observation and adaptation rather than confrontation. By these hours, the interplay of observation and response suggested a broader strategic narrative. In expert commentary, the operation was interpreted as a signal, not merely a tactical incursion. The submarine's measured presence in sensitive maritime zones appeared to serve multiple purposes: testing Sweden's readiness, projecting operational capability, and potentially influencing regional deterrence calculations. Analysts in diplomatic circles quietly debated the implications, noting that such maneuvers, though covert, inevitably carried geopolitical resonance. Each alteration in course or depth was read not just as a naval tactic, but as part of a message intended for multiple audiences: Sweden, neighboring NATO members, and potentially other actors monitoring Baltic security dynamics. At this stage, the dichotomy between public narrative and operational reality became particularly evident. Official reports stressed calm and normalcy, yet behind closed doors, military planners were actively discussing escalation scenarios, rules of engagement, and rapid response contingencies. Sources suggest that contingency plans, normally reserved for rare high-threat situations, were activated immediately, reflecting both confidence in operational systems and awareness of the strategic sensitivity of the submarine's approach. The day's events were not being treated as a simple incursion, but rather as a controlled yet unpredictable probe into Sweden's defensive posture. Throughout the unfolding situation, the analytical narrative underscored a key insight. The presence of the submarine, the rapid deployment of Swedish forces, and the pattern of intercepted communications were all part of a complex intelligence exchange occurring in real time. It was not merely a military engagement, but a carefully constructed test of information flows, decision-making structures, and signaling under pressure. Observers noted that each maneuver, each deployment, and each decision, while appearing reactive on the surface, was being assessed for strategic implications, forming a live map of capabilities and vulnerabilities. Possibly, it is worth monitoring the evolution of these interactions closely. Sources indicate that what seems like a routine encounter may, in fact, be the opening phase of a more intricate operational and strategic exercise. However, beneath the surface, more intricate and concealed layers of maneuvering were already in motion, suggesting that the public perception of calm masked a far deeper engagement of systems, priorities, and signals, which would only fully reveal themselves as the day unfolded further. As the day moved further toward its central hours, the operational tempo in the Baltic intensified, revealing a convergence of tactical precision and strategic signaling that few outside official channels could fully discern. According to sources within Swedish Naval Command, the response had evolved beyond initial tracking and reconnaissance into a layered defensive posture, integrating surface fleets, submarines, and aerial assets into a coordinated network designed to anticipate potential maneuvers and contain any escalation. Each vessel, each patrol pattern, and each sonar sweep was executed according to pre-established scenarios, yet analysts noted the fluidity and adaptability of the deployment reflected real-time assessment rather than rigid adherence to protocol. Meanwhile, intelligence intercepts continued to provide insights into the submarine's objectives. Sources indicate that the vessel engaged in irregular acoustic emissions, likely intended to map sonar blind spots and test Sweden's detection thresholds. Analysts interpreted these signals as part of a broader reconnaissance operation, with subtle but deliberate attempts to gauge readiness and extract operational data without prompting overt confrontation. In defense circles, the day's unfolding sequence was described as a carefully orchestrated probe designed to measure response speed, communication hierarchies, and procedural compliance across multiple layers of command. Officially, Swedish authorities maintained the narrative of controlled exercises, but internal communications, as reported by informed sources, conveyed a heightened level of scrutiny and urgency. Complicating the scenario further, the regional geopolitical context added weight to every decision. Observers in expert circles highlighted that the submarine's incursion, while tactically limited, carried broader implications for NATO's northern flank. Analysts noted that Sweden's responses were evaluated not only for effectiveness, but also for signaling. The deployment of assets in patterns visible to potential observers served as a deterrent message, reinforcing readiness without escalating to direct confrontation. Sources close to policy discussions indicated that diplomatic channels were quietly monitoring the operational movements, assessing whether Sweden's measured but decisive posture would convey sufficient deterrence to avoid unintended escalation. In parallel, operational feedback loops within Swedish command were continuously refined. Tactical adjustments, informed by live sensor data, allowed for a dynamic response grid, where surface vessels altered positions, airborne surveillance paths were recalibrated, and anti-submarine systems were fine-tuned in near real time. Experts analyzing these movements emphasized the sophistication of such coordination. The exercise revealed a networked approach to maritime defense, blending predictive analytics with operational agility. The efficiency and speed of these adjustments suggested extensive prior planning, though insiders acknowledged that the submarine's unpredictable maneuvers still required improvisational judgment at several decision nodes. The day's developments also exposed subtle tensions between public perception and operational reality. While official statements emphasize calm, sources suggest internal assessments recognize the need to balance transparency with strategic ambiguity. Analysts in security forums noted that any overt disclosure of the full response capabilities could reveal sensitive procedural knowledge to foreign actors, potentially undermining defensive advantage. Thus, the unfolding events were managed as both a real-time operational engagement and a carefully controlled information exercise, where what was publicly visible was only a fraction of the actual activity. Possibly, attention should be paid to the trajectories and patterns emerging over these hours. Sources indicate that the interactions observed may be part of a larger strategic evaluation, encompassing not only immediate readiness but also long-term deterrence posturing. However, beneath the orchestrated maneuvers, more complex calculations were underway. Signals, positional adjustments, and command decisions suggested that each action was simultaneously a defensive measure, an intelligence probe, and a diplomatic signal. The surface narrative of containment concealed a multidimensional operation in which the balance of observation, readiness, and strategic messaging intersected, a game of precision and subtlety that would shape both the day's developments and the longer-term security calculus in the Baltic. As the day edged toward its later hours, the intensity of the operational choreography began to subside, leaving in its wake a layered tableau of strategic calculation, subtle signaling, and ongoing observation. By this point, the Russian submarine, having completed its measured reconnaissance pattern, began to shift course, retracing parts of its trajectory with a deliberate unpredictability that analysts in expert circles interpreted as both a test and a message. Swedish naval units maintained their heightened alert, yet the tempo of real-time maneuvers began to ease, reflecting a transition from immediate engagement to sustained monitoring and assessment. Sources indicate that the continued presence of surveillance and tracking elements was not merely procedural, but a carefully calibrated effort to project vigilance while gathering further intelligence. In diplomatic channels, conversations remained discreet but intense. Officials emphasized the importance of measured messaging, balancing transparency with strategic opacity. Observers in the security community noted that public reassurances were consistent with a broader approach, demonstrating operational competence without exposing the full scope of defensive readiness. Internal communications, as reported by informed sources, reflected an intricate tension between revealing sufficient capability to deter further provocations and maintaining operational security across multiple theaters of observation. The implications were clear. The day's events were as much about perception management and signaling as they were about tactical engagement. Operationally, analysts pointed to the unprecedented coordination displayed across Sweden's anti-submarine systems, real-time integration of sonar data, radar sweeps, aerial reconnaissance, and fleet maneuvers provided a continuous operational picture that allowed decision-makers to anticipate potential submarine actions. Observers emphasized that such responsiveness was possible only through rigorous prior planning, extensive simulation exercises, and adaptive command protocols. Yet, insiders cautioned that the unpredictable nature of underwater operations meant that even with sophisticated planning, each decision carried risk, a reminder that in complex maritime theaters, preparedness is never absolute, and every response is both a statement and a calculation. Throughout the day, the interplay of observation, anticipation, and discrete signaling underscored the broader strategic significance of the incident. Analysts noted that beyond the immediate tactical implications, the event had reverberations for regional security perceptions, alliance considerations, and long-term deterrence dynamics. Each maneuver, each adjustment, and each carefully controlled disclosure was part of a multifaceted communication strategy, conveying resolve, projecting readiness, and shaping the operational expectations of external observers. Observers in the defense community described this as a live demonstration of national resilience, carefully calibrated to communicate both capability and restraint. By mid-afternoon, the immediate operational uncertainty had shifted into an extended period of calculated observation. Surveillance continued, but decisions reflected a more measured pace, allowing for reflection and assessment. Analysts in expert circles highlighted that such a transition was indicative of a sophisticated operational doctrine, managing both the kinetic and perceptual dimensions of an incident to achieve strategic objectives without escalating confrontation. Internal sources suggested that ongoing monitoring would persist, ensuring that any further incursions or signals could be met with the same rapid and integrated response, while maintaining strategic ambiguity. On the surface, the day concluded with a semblance of calm. Surface vessels returned to patrol patterns. Aircraft resumed standard observation circuits, and public statements reinforced the narrative of controlled readiness. Beneath this veneer, however, the operational and analytical machinery remained fully engaged. Each decision, each maneuver, and each intercepted signal had been processed, catalogued, and evaluated within a broader strategic framework that extended beyond the immediate horizon. At first glance, the situation might appear resolved, yet sources within defense and intelligence circles caution that the full implications are still unfolding. The day has demonstrated not only the precision and responsiveness of Swedish maritime defense, but also the complex interplay of intelligence, signaling, and strategic perception that defines modern naval operations. Observers note that every measured action, every subtle adjustment, contributes to a living map of readiness and deterrence, a dynamic landscape in which appearances can be deceptive, and where the underlying currents of strategy are as critical as the visible movements on the surface. Those who track these developments closely recognize that the day's events are unlikely to be an isolated episode. The calm that now dominates public perception belies the ongoing attention, analysis, and readiness that continue behind the scenes. In this light, the incident may mark the opening of a sustained phase of strategic observation and interaction in the Baltic, one in which every movement, every signal, and every decision will carry significance beyond its immediate context. On the surface, the waters have settled, but beneath, the calculations, the signals, and the anticipation continue, a quiet reminder that in the realm of maritime security, the story is never truly complete, and the next phase of observation may already be underway.